Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Caroline Colas, and I am your host today on the Positive Psychology Hour, a series that we have been doing for the last 2 years in partnership with Whole Being Institute. The series is curated by Phoebe Atkinson. Today, we're going to be discussing meanderings through meaning, a multifaceted approach with Deb Levin. Our key to happiness journey is finding and integrating meaning and purpose into our lives. Join Deborah today for an art-filled journey exploring aspects of meaning and purpose. And we'll find out her view that we encounter multiple meanings and multiple purposes throughout each day and throughout our lives. Deborah has used her knowledge of positive psychology to navigate a sooner than expected retirement from a career in finance, as a credit analyst for Mount Life, and as an equity analyst for Morgan Stanley. All along, she has been an art enthusiast, working in collage and contemporary art quilting. She earned a BFA in printmaking from the University of Buffalo, along with a degree in economics, followed by an MBA from the University of Chicago. Looking for personal growth, she earned a certificate in positive psychology from the Whole Being Institute in 2016. Deborah has been on the call before, and it is just a joy to have her back. We talked at one point about having you do a tour for us, an in-person tour, which I think we still have on the docket, because as people are starting to come back, why not, right?
Okay.
I'll let you take it away today.
Okay. Thank you very much, Caroline. And thank you, Phoebe, who I believe is listening as she's on a train. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Let me put up the presentation. And Caroline, just let me know when you can see the screen.
I can see it.
Great. Okay. So this presentation it's titled Meanderings Through Meaning, a Multifaceted Approach, and really has to do with ideas I've been thinking about really for a number of years. So it's kind of a quirky presentation, and I welcome people's comments in the chat function. We'll have an opportunity for at least one breakout during the hour. And the idea really is this is more of an exploration. I had several titles for this originally. One was Narrative in the Quest for Happiness. Another one was about incorporating meaning and purpose. But really, I decided multifaceted is the key thing. You've got an illustration of a disco ball on the first slide. And really, disco ball, this is, that's my standard about we are all disco balls. I think of human beings, that we're multifaceted. We're not just one thing. And this was a fun presentation to put together. So just to let you know, for anybody who saw my initial presentation, I had done one earlier for the JCC. It was back in, I believe, April 2020. So it was just when we were at the beginning of starting these webinars as everybody was sheltering in place. And I had done a presentation called Uplift Through Art, talking about concepts in positive psychology as reflected in art. And that one was specific to pieces taken or examples taken from the Metropolitan Museum. So there are a few pieces of art that are the same as from the last presentation, and then other ideas that I've brought in. Okay, so Meanderings. I love this piece. Wayne Thiebaud is one of my favorite artists. He has this beautiful pastel palette. And I thought the idea of using an example of a bird's eye view and your eye just sort of wanders around the painting was just a great painting to start with. And interestingly, the artist had passed away recently. He was 101 years old. He passed away in December 2021. And there was a quote from his gallery, Aquavella, when he passed, saying that even at 101 years old, he spent most of his days in the studio, driven by, as he described with his characteristic humility, this almost neurotic fixation on trying to learn to paint. And I thought, well, that is this wonderful example of what meaning is, that he's spending his whole life and still learning and still growing, and still coming up with really magnificent pieces. Okay, so that's the meanderings. Okay, so we go on to the next one. Okay, and this one is titled The Purpose Problem. And the purpose problem, and I quote from a blog I read, and this was about retired people, this idea that I believe the key to a good life for us older people is finding a purpose that is uniquely right for us. And when I read this, and very often you will hear these kind of quotes about finding your purpose in life. And I had a pretty big negative reaction when I read this, or when I hear something like that. And the reason for the reaction is this idea of one purpose in life, something that's uniquely suited for us. Because my thinking is that it's, there are many purposes in life. It changes during the course of your life. It also changes during the time of day. When you're eating breakfast, your purpose is to eat breakfast. When you're in conversation, your purpose is to really listen and have good dialogue. And when you're putting together a presentation, your purpose is to put together the presentation and try to find the best examples you can. So illustrating this is a piece from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and Joan of Arc. And I love this painting. You can actually see her voices if you look in the trees. But Joan of Arc is an example of somebody who had one purpose in life, or at least the way the story is told, right? Her purpose was to get the English out of France. So that, I think, is a big thing that we have to think about going forward, about the different purposes. Okay, so meaning and purpose. We think about positive psychology. Meaning and purpose are essential for happiness. And the Mona Lisa with her smile played with is actually, I think of her as my avatar. I used her on my initial final project when I took the SIP class. But if there was a big takeaway from the SIP class, or the certificate in positive psychology, is that meaning is an essential element of well-being. Interestingly, during COVID, I actually read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. It was, one of the books I had meant to read, and the opportunity for the pandemic gave us opportunities, I think, to attend to things that we hadn't gotten around to, and that was one of the things I did. And Frankl, when he's talking about his concentration camp experience and describing it, it's absolutely, so horrible, so difficult, and yet getting the point across that the only way to survive was to find meaning and to build community. He gives some beautiful examples in that book. I read an article in Scientific American that was written in 2016 that talked about meaning is related to activities such as developing a personal identity, expressing the self, consciously integrating one's past, present, and future experiences. And they also talked about this paradox that we can have deep meaning, but may not necessarily be happy. And one of the frequent examples is, parenting, which can be very, very difficult, but meaningful. Not always, people are parents and always in a state of happiness. So meaning and purpose, absolutely essential. So I thought, well, let's look at what actually is meaning. And the definition of meaning, we go to dictionary, I looked at Merriam-Webster, is the thing that one intends to convey, especially by language. So there are synonyms: content, detonation, drift, import, intent, intention, purport, sense, significance. And then purpose is a little more active, right? But something set up as an object or the end to be attained. So again, that effort to bring it about, what you want to bring about. And the synonyms overlap, but they're not exactly the same. So when we look at synonyms for purpose, aim, ambition, aspiration, design, dream, goal, idea, ideal, intent, intention, mark, meaning, object, objective, plan, point, pretension, target. So I also want to bring in the idea that I think mindfulness is one of the lenses that we can use to help us understand and identify meaning and purpose. And mindfulness, of course, is a big concept in positive psychology. So one of the points about putting together the presentation is trying to look at the different positive psychology ideas and understand meaning and purpose through them. Okay, so what is meaning? And I have to thank Phoebe for pointing out some of the content on the WBI website or Whole Being Institute website, and pointing out the work of Michael Steger, who is a professor of psychology and the director of the Center for Meaning and Purpose at Colorado State University. So he has researched meaning and purpose for 20 years. The picture comes from a YouTube video above, and you can actually look up and watch the video where he discusses meaning. But the big points that he makes and comes across about what is meaning, when you're thinking about it for yourself, it means that life is worthwhile. I matter, there's value, life makes sense. I understand what happens and where I fit, and life has a point. I see and pursue a purpose for my existence. And so this is sort of, again, one purpose, but I think of it as, we can think of this in the moment, we can think of this in the day, we can think of this over time. And that realistically, meaning is going to change over time. Okay. So what drives meaning? And the illustration here is the thinker, which I think is ideal when we're asking ourselves questions. And really, it comes down to, what do we value? What resonates with us? And what story do we tell ourselves? So we're starting to bring in the idea about the importance of narrative. And I think narrative is huge. And it's everywhere. The stories that really resonate with us help us, I think, identify meaning. I had read *Sapiens*, which is a book by the historian Yuval Noah Harari, and he's written quite a number of books, but he talks about in his books this unique trait that humans have, which is the ability to create and believe in fictions and shared fictions, these stories that we tell ourselves, and that enables us to get huge amount of things done. One example he gives us as a fiction or as a story is money, that we all embrace money. If you really think about it, what is a dollar bill worth? It's because we all believe it has value, that we can use it as a medium of exchange. Okay, so let's go on and say, what is narrative? And, it's a very broad concept, right? Spoken or written account, a way of presenting or understanding a situation, representation in art or an event of a story. And there was this really great article in the New Yorker last year about what makes a cult, and it looked at various books written on this and gave various stories. And in fact, one of the things that was interesting about the illustration accompanying the magazine article is it stated that all of us hold some beliefs for which there is no compelling evidence, that we are constantly embracing and telling ourselves stories. And one of the quotes in the article is, humans understand the world through narratives. And one of the stories told in the magazine article was about a cult in the Midwest in the 1950s, where the cult leader had talked about flying saucers that were going to come down and rescue all of the cult members from the terrible flooding that was going to destroy the earth. And of course, on the day that it was supposed to happen, no flying saucers arrived. And what was interesting is some of the people left the cult, said, well, this story isn't true. And others dug down and even embraced it further, with the new date. And so here's a story of, you talk about purpose and meaning, and, impacting how people live their entire lives. I find that remarkable. There was a comment in the article about QAnon and talking about the fact that members of the QAnon are really seeking meaning and purpose. So here we are talking in positive psychology that we need meaning and purpose for happiness. And look at where it can drive extreme behavior for humans, and also great behavior, right? So here's an example about meaning, purpose, and narrative that I think most people would be familiar with, and think about how powerful this was. So this is the first edition of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. It was written in 1843. It's constantly been in print, and it helped change Victorian society by boosting people's awareness of the plight of the poor in Victorian England. And that was a society where there were extremes of wealth and poverty. So, and the idea that it changed awareness, it changed people's actions in terms of giving to charity is pretty amazing, and obviously a powerful story, because it's never been out of print and been adapted numerous times, whether it's for theater or for opera, movies, etc. Okay, so what does narrative do? It facilitates connection, it creates and strengthens values, facilitates meaning. The illustration, this one is by, oh, I have a typo there. It's by Sharon Malloy, which is, she's not a famous artist, but she paints networks. And since networks of information and connection are so important, and I think such a big part of narrative, I thought it was a beautiful illustration for the concept. NPR had an article in April 2020 about how stories connect and persuade us, unleashing the brain power of narrative. And in the article, they mentioned that on functional MRI scans, many different areas of the brain light up when someone is listening to a narrative. So the stories wield a particularly strong influence over our attitudes and behavior. And if you think about the times when somebody's beliefs have changed, it's often because the story hits them in the heart. And there was another story recently, and this was from the New York Times in February 20th, about Afghan refugees. And the article commented that when United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees seeks to determine if a migrant is a refugee, allowing refugee status, the interviewer looks for content and credible story that demonstrates a well-founded fear of persecution on an individual basis. So there you are, the importance of story, how that can change somebody's life or change somebody's opportunities. To me, it's just amazing in terms of when you start looking for narrative, how often you see it. So now I want to look at where do we see narrative. So here, here are all the synonyms for narrative, as I had mentioned before, and I'm illustrating with the cover of book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. And this is an old book, 1949, but this was the idea of that there are myths worldwide. They have common elements and themes that these myths are used to help give people a sense of identity and drive action. He concentrates on this idea of the hero venturing forth from the world of the common day into a region of supernatural wonder, encounters various forces, a decisive victory, comes back from the mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. So it's something that's very powerful and something that Joseph Campbell publicized with this book. And when we think about narrative, we see it everywhere, right? Books, movies, journalism. So when we think of newspapers, magazines, websites, TV news, television, social media, how we talk among ourselves, religion, right? And if you have Netflix, I recommend watching Brene Brown's Call to Courage. She covers, this wonderful range of topics, but one of the key things she talks about in the documentary is the story I tell myself, and talks about how important that is and how two people can be in the same situation and be seeing totally different stories, be telling themselves totally different stories about the same facts. That sort of It goes back to the film Rashomon, which was made decades ago, right? And here's from the Wall Street Journal, in a recent art review, talking about a review of an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art about Louis David. And here it is, Radical Draftsman's review. Grand stories, emphasizing stories in a humble medium, looking about how stories are communicated through in painting and art. And I noticed for the American Museum of Natural History, when they were talking about their shark exhibit, which is another exhibit I haven't seen yet, but they're talking about storytelling in 3 dimensions. That's what special exhibitions are. So, as I said, you know, wherever we turn, we see stories. And I think one of the most interesting ones hit me was from Sunday Morning, where they had done a piece in September 2021 about the Andy Griffin Show. And the segment actually went to the city of Mount Airy, North Carolina, which was supposed to be, or claims to be, the prototype for Mayberry. Now, if you remember the Andy Griffin Show, which was on a long time ago, 1960 to 1968, this was a fictional show. Mayberry's a fictional place. And yet this prototype for Mayberry, Mount Airy, North Carolina, draws thousands of tourists every year looking to relive their experiences in the TV show. So it's driving action. It must, I have to assume it's giving these people some sense of purpose. It's meaningful to them, right? And the show itself was always a fiction, right? So to me, this is pretty amazing. And then this other idea about even therapy, right, can be about changing one's narrative. Narrative therapy is an approach that looks to adjust the stories that one tells from oneself. And I put up Van Gogh because when I was thinking about this idea about what are the stories we tell, here's a self-portrait of Van Gogh after he damaged himself, right, cutting off his ear. And you could say, okay, this is somebody who had, you know, tremendous mental challenges, or you can look at it and say this was a driven artist who created magnificent artwork that we appreciate today. So it's a pretty powerful thing in terms of what stories can do. So at this point, I actually want to stop and see if we have any questions and comments, and then I would like to go into breakouts and have people discuss what drives meaning for them. What do we value? What resonates? What stories do we tell ourselves? And my sense would be to give ourselves, you know, just one example and get a chance to share with others. Does that make sense? So Caroline?
Sure. I was just writing it in the chat. What drives meaning for you is what you want people to answer?
Really, what stories drive meaning would be, I think, the key question. So the full questions are, what do we value? What resonates? What stories do we tell ourselves? So what stories drive meaning for us?
Okay. And do you want people to answer that, or do you want a breakout room?
A breakout room, I think. Because I think it's easier, given the number of people, that you'll have more discussion. And I have to say that when I've participated, and I participate in the Tuesday, Thursday sessions whenever I can, I love breakout rooms, right? It lets you feel like you have direct engagement.
Great. And so I'm going to put about 4 or 5 people in a room, because some people will join, some people won't. And if you want to stay in the main room, you're welcome to do that. And we'll talk about what the stories that drive us. Deb and I will do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this. And please accept the room, and we'll see you in a bit. About how 5 minutes you want them to have?
Yeah. I mean, I think if it's 4 or 5 people, maybe 6 minutes.
Well, I'll let you know in just a second. We'll see how many people. If you don't, I will move you around. So if you're in there by yourself, don't worry. I will move you around. Okay, room 1 looks like it's good.
Okay.
Room 2, hang on. Let me just pause the recording for a second. and I'll help people.
Okay, so we're back now. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. You know, I'd love if people could put in the chat if there was any takeaways, or if anybody wants to share with us anything that came out from the breakout sessions. We had a question here about is everything a story, right?
Be next to someone.
Yeah.
It's risky business.
Please raise your hand if you want to share so that I know, or just wave at us. Sally, did you want to share? You're unmuted.
Me, Sally Borgman.
Sally Borg, you're unmuted. Did you want to share?
Oh, I am unmuted. I'm unmuted now. Oh, okay. I guess well, I would just say that was wonderful. We had a really interesting discussion very quickly. I think the questions made us dive into things, and people said that what you said, Deborah, about our perspectives change over time, and the stories and the things that we value change over time. And we all felt that has happened to us. And then the last thing that somebody said right before we got ended was that they're finding what's meaningful to them is honesty, integrity, and connections, which are important.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sally.
Okay. And does anybody else want to share? I see Nancy.
Yes, I had a wonderful session with Karen. It was just the two of us, but we really connected, and we had the same kind of reaction to the question. I also wanted to share something right now. What helped me when you were talking about narrative and helping a person get better with mental health and with focus. And during the pandemic, I had a really, really hard time, a very hard time these past couple of years living alone and not being able to be with the people I love. And I ended up, at the suggestion of someone I was a therapist online, to write to COVID, because I said, I am so angry with COVID. I am so furious with what it has done to our lives. And she said, why don't you write a letter to COVID and let it know how you feel? I have to tell you that it was such a powerful experience. And it really, really helped me a lot. So I just wanted to share that.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you, everybody. And I appreciate the comments in the chat. And let me just, I just wanted to look through some of them where people are saying, about stories keeping me stuck with negative beliefs that don't support me. So there's the challenge about changing our stories. Driven to improve the lives of women in what has been a man's world through the ages. So looking for the stories that resonate and work is important. Fundamental purpose is to be happy. Yeah, and then looking for finding how do we achieve that.
We also have a call-in user that wants to unmute and share. Go ahead. Is that Barbara? Is that you?
Yes, it is.
Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me now? Oh,
We
thank
can.
you. Thank you so much. I had a good meeting also with people in our breakout. And what's happened to me is since COVID is that, so my work as a social worker for over 40 years had huge meaning to me, but I'm retired now. And then came my family, children, grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. And since COVID hit, unfortunately, my entire family are anti-vaxxers. And so I can't see them unless it's warm. I have to wait for the season where it's warm and we can go in their backyard or a park or whatever. And that's been very difficult. So what was most meaningful, and then friends also, of course, but the family, especially those little ones, it's very painful not to be able to see them. I talk to my doctors about it and all kinds of, people trying to figure out how to do this thing. And one of my grandsons is an entertainer, and he's very famous, and he's traveling constantly all over the country and the world, constantly, and he's singing to crowds without a mask. He's not vaccinated. And most of the people he sings to are not vaccinated either. And it's dangerous for me. And so he's got 3 kids, and he goes home to them, and he thinks it's okay because he thinks he has antibodies from the virus 2 years ago or a year ago, whatever. You can't talk to people who don't want to do what they don't want to do. And I'm trying to accept the unacceptable. And so what I'm trying to do now that I want to share is find new meaning, and in friends and groups that I go into, like yours, neighbors, people who are just around, but it's just still, it's hard not to have a broken heart about what really is most meaningful, but I am trying to work on being positive and look at what I have that is so meaningful and a blessing. So I'm just sharing that with them, and that's what I did in the group. And I don't know if there are other people in our group now who experience those kinds of things where there's a significant loss based on beliefs that are different in families.
Yeah,
Sure.
And I think that's really, thank you for sharing this. I think that really illustrates how powerful stories can be. And, you know, the decision that, you know, if you believe that the decision not to get vaccinated, and that can lead to all kinds of difficulties, challenges, change people's lives, end people's lives. Yeah, it's quite chilling.
It's also, don't you think, Deborah, it's also every choice that we make has an impact. And this is a very significant example of that. Everyone, right? Every choice that we make. And sometimes we don't realize that, but it does. Whether we delay a doctor's appointment, that has an impact. Whether we, you know, send a note to a friend to encourage them, that has an impact. So, and sometimes these things, I think, what do I want to say? I think our hearts are breaking all the time. I think of the situation in Ukraine right now. And what I'm thinking about now is something that Viktor Frankl would say, right? In between the stimulus and response, there was a pause. And in that pause, we have a choice. But I'm also thinking of a tikkun olam, that, you know, we're all a bit broken, and that there is light that shines through those broken places, and that those shards of light, when put together, illuminate the world. And I think that's really what we need to do in terms of creating meaning, and why someone asked me why I supported the positive psychology calls. And one of the reasons I did this from the very beginning and partnered with Phoebe and Megan at Whole Being Institute was in March last year, right around this time, we had a conversation about, oh my goodness, we have to be there for people, right? And we don't, as an organization, we hadn't ever done anything online, nothing, not even as a staff. So, and I thought, how can we be there as a resource, which we've always been for others? And what we did, thank goodness, with Megan and Phoebe introduced me to Megan. Megan said, how can we help? Which is one of the tenets of positive psychology, which is making a difference in the world, not just in your own world, but also taking that into the larger world. And that was such a great example of that. And here we are 2 years later, Deb, right? And we're thinking that. So we're still doing it.
Yeah, and I think, Karen, that's really a wonderful entree. Let me continue with the presentation, because you talk about the Positive Psychology Hour, creating meaning and purpose for, you know, you and Phoebe and this whole community. And so I wanted to start back with what stories resonate to me and for me. And what I put up here is a book by Jared Diamond. Jared Diamond's an author, geography professor. He won a Pulitzer for Guns, Germs, and Steel, about how civilizations arise. That was back in 1997. He wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel. And then in 2004, he wrote a book called Collapse, about how societies collapse. And this next to it is a recent New Yorker cover, which I think is phenomenal. If you think about the wildfires in California and taking Don Quixote and this idea about, yeah, we've got the windmills literally for creating energy now, green energy, and yet Don Quixote, we're tilting at windmills. So that leads you to a pretty negative place. And just as one of our other participants shared, when you're dealing with stories and people who are embracing stories that go against your way of thinking and possibly, you know, have pretty big negative implications. Certainly if somebody doesn't get vaccinated and gets sick with COVID or ends up being really challenged, that's hard to accept that that was the story somebody accepted and led to action. So what does positive psychology do? It gives us different techniques and different tools to, you know, find the positive, find the uplift. So I wanted to start looking at various lenses from positive psychology and how we can find meaning and purpose through those lenses. And one of the most powerful set of tools is character strengths. This actually is a slide from my first presentation. I think many people will be familiar with character strengths. If you're not, you can take the quiz and receive the listing of your character strengths. The illustration is not a famous painting, but I found this when I was working on my final project for SIP back in 2016. It's of Hercules. I feel like this should be a famous painting. I think there's such strength illustrated in this illustration. If you look at the stance, the face, the gesture, the fur, the lion's fur draped around him, the bar, I just love it. Old painting, 1642, and it's in a private collection, so not famous. Okay, but character strength. So this is again from my original presentation. I chose a Peter Max because I wanted all, you know, rainbows and unicorns. Like there's so many of them, and we all have the character strengths. So the groupings are in virtues. Probably most people are familiar. I'm thinking in this audience. If not, it's worth looking into. The idea when we use our character strengths, it's like the wind at your back to try to get more of all the positive things, you know, love and appreciation of life and meaning and purpose. When you use your strongest strengths, the idea is that there's a real positive sense that you embrace and feel, experience, and others will as well. So I want to give an example about character strengths for myself. And art has been part of my life. And so as Carolyn had mentioned in the introduction, that art's always been part of my life. And so the appreciation of beauty and excellence is a big positive for me. The first picture was actually taken at the Cooper Hewitt. They have this room where you can play with basically light cameras, and they're projected. I projected on walls, and that was just a photo taken where the projection's on me. When the below that is just a picture of myself working on a project for City Arts, which is a nonprofit organization focused on public art. And we were restoring a mural in a park up at 138th Street. And I worked on that project when I initially was retired. My COVID project was, I was working on these pins, really just found objects, and it was just a fun way of making these small assemblages while we were all sheltering in place, which, as I'm sure most people remember, we were spending even more time at home than we are at now when the pandemic first started. And I love doing art at home, but what I really like is doing art in community, in classes. So I'd gone to Omega, which is up in Rhinebeck, New York, and they have all kinds of programs generally during the spring, summer, and fall. And I took a collage class. And so over on the right were pieces I've made at collage class, and realized that I liked making the art in class so much that I signed up for an art class at the 92nd Street Y, which I go to every Monday now. And in the bottom middle were two pieces that I've made at my 92nd Street collage class. And the girl with the pearl earring does show up a lot in my work. She's sort of my avatar, if you will. So here, and I'm just watching the time. So instead of doing another breakout session, I asked the question, what drives meaning and purpose for you? So maybe we can have people put in the chat and share with us what character strengths they feel that they can use in order to help themselves in terms of meaning and purpose. And I did want to go back and just mention that when I look at the art, and we look at the character strengths, in there for me is creativity, love of learning, appreciation of beauty and excellence, perseverance, zest. There's a whole relational aspect because I love being in class and talking to people. So that includes love and kindness and social intelligence and teamwork. And even I would say spirituality, when we think about spirituality being really at the core of what meaning is. So I think when you find things that work for you in terms of meaning, that it can draw on, many, many positive strengths. And even if the strengths on the lower down ones, can still be part of who you are and can be brought out. So let me just stop the share right here and see if in the chat box, if people can talk about what character strengths people think can help them in terms of creating more purpose and meaning in their lives.
We have some comments in the chat. One was that Deirdre Rose really wanted to say that she really felt what Barbara was saying. She said, I really feel you. So I would just wanted Barbara, you to know that. And then Rachel said, of course, lots of gratitude. Yes, thank you to Phoebe and Megan and myself for putting the series together. And then Kim was saying these meetings have given me so much inspiration, and I don't always attend, but I do look forward to so much to them when I can. And remember, everybody, you can sign up for them and you will get the recordings. Andrea said, I'm very grateful for this program. It's helped me get through so many things, from stress as a caregiver, a death, celebrating a new birth. Wow, the full spectrum of life, Andrea. And Bunny said, I can only add my thanks for these programs, as they have helped me get through these past 2 years of stress, loneliness, and all other negatives related to this pandemic time. It literally has given me the information, hope, comfort, and all things positive. I'm forever grateful. Rabbi Orenstein said, love most of all, curiosity, spirituality, and love of learning drive purpose for me. And Rachel said, love of learning, humor, appreciation of beauty, and excellence. And for me, it's been certainly curiosity, and I have found a large dose of humility has helped me during this drive meaning. Just being listening and learning from others and from the situation, and not assuming that I knew what to do. It's been a space, Deb, don't you think we've been in a lot of the unknown?
Yeah, I would say that, this dealing with the liminal place is what a big part of this pandemic has been for us. Yeah, it's this
Right. I had an interesting conversation, and I'm inviting everybody next week, next Tuesday, to we're going to be talking about art and the brain. And yesterday I met with the neurologist who has studied art in the brain, and an artist. And she was talking exactly about what you were talking about, Deb, which is that there's this liminal space in between. When an artist starts to work, sometimes they don't even know what they're creating. They are creating something because they have to. They're just drawn to almost get from what's on the inside out, right? Yeah. As well as being influenced by what's on the outside and affecting it in. And then sometimes when the art is out, they go, oh, this painting was about this.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I wondered,
and actually this ties into, if I can start the share screen again. So sure. I wanted to go into this idea about purpose, which is really the action driven part of the meaning. And this illustration I found when I was putting the presentation together. One of the things, talk about love of learning, which is always a big driver for me. You learn when you put the presentation together. And I felt that this illustration really shows you like an idea just being forced into reality, right? The clouds becoming the ship. It's that progression. I thought this is by Robert Gonsalves, and he's a Canadian painter. And I think it's just magnificent. So
Gorgeous.
So now we start asking these questions from positive psychology. So one of the ways to, in terms of drive purpose, is this idea of appreciative inquiry. This idea that positive questions cultivate growth. So I have the example with the Monet because, wow, that's just growth everywhere in his garden. And so examples of positive questions. What do we love to do? Why do we do the things that we do? And what impact do our favorite things have? So I gave the example, you know, about art for me and how many aspects come out that are positive for me, you know, including, you know, a very kind of working in a group and teamwork and sharing ideas with people. Okay, and you know, and I want to get through a few more slides, so I'll just keep going. I see we have 5 minutes. So moms, moments of meaning and purpose. This is the idea, and I had mentioned mindfulness earlier about really recognizing when things have meaning and are positive. I love this Edward Hopper illustration, this idea of, you know, it's of the moment at the morning light, and it's just beautiful and quiet. And I think you know, this is something that if we're mindful, we can be aware of those moments. And actually, you know, you can look at them every time of day. You can say, you know, you can go through your day and say, okay, I did this, I did that, I did this, I can that. Or you can go through the day and say, I got up, wow, I got up. I stretched, oh, I can move. Oh, I brushed my teeth. Look, I have running water, I have drinkable water. I have the ability to brush my teeth. I mean, you can go through the whole day that way and appreciate the moment. So the important thing is, you know, thinking about what is the lens that we're looking through. And so this is a very old illustration, 1892, but really, what do you see, right? You look at it one way, you see a duck. You look at another way, you see a rabbit. You know, the lens we use determines what we see. So flow, that's another, again, that, you know, things, when we're in flow, when time stands still, when we're totally engaged, I think that, you know, that's an idea that those can be times of great meaning.
They do breakout rooms, and you can join the breakout room or not. So this woman, there's 3 of us in the breakout room.
Okay, I think that was something else. So this is a Sargent painting, and I think those 2 little girls are absolutely in flow, just totally engaged in what they're doing. And the conditions for flow, you need passion, appropriate level of challenge, appropriate level of skill, and non-threatening immediate feedback. And so looking for those activities that get us into flow, whether it's conversation, reading, art, walking in nature, can all help build those moments of meaning, and I think help, you know, let us recognize part of our purpose. Adopting a growth mindset, that's the idea from Carol Dweck about this idea that we can always learn and grow. And so this is actually a photograph I took in the Ramble in Central Park. I love this area in the Ramble because you would never guess from looking at this picture it was taken in the middle of Manhattan, and it was. There's that much growth, and we can look for those moments and appreciate them, and we can learn and grow ourselves. And then I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention positive relationships. This book, which when I took my certificate in positive psychology class, was just recommended. It wasn't assigned reading by Barbara Fredrickson, and yet I thought it was an especially powerful book. And this idea that positive relationships, even if they're small, even if it's just a small conversation you have with an acquaintance, can have big positive, inspire big positive feelings between people. So I thought that was just a terrific book. And then meditation, I've got the listing of all different kinds of meditation. I show the Tibetan bowls because I love sound baths, but again, I think that helps us in terms of quieting, finding meaning, finding purpose. and feeling more comfortable in our own skin. Next lens, savoring, and I chose the Caravaggio with that basket of fruit that's just luscious. This idea that, again, like the meaning, moments of meaning and purpose, like watching for those things to appreciate is important. And using a lens of gratitude, right? Positive psychology tells us that gratitude is associated with greater happiness. And through that lens of gratitude, again, helping to drive meaning, helping to drive purpose. So this is the question I leave everybody with. Who are we at our best? How do we find those elements that help drive us to be our best? The illustration is by Alex Gray, who is an artist, that he did this series about the human sacred mirrors. And he basically says we are at our core these energy fountains that connect with each other. And I love the thinking that he illustrates there. And to remember that for positive psychology, the thing that works is to focus on what works. This is Vermeer, the lace maker, and she is focused. And that finishes out the presentation exactly at 1 o'clock. So what provides meaning and purpose for you is the question that I leave you with.
Amazing. Amazing, Deb. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And we had some wonderful sharing in the chat about retaking the VIA strength assessment at this time. And I reminded everyone you can take it every year for free. It's absolutely a free assessment, and more times than that if you want to pay for it. And I put in the chat also about our Brain Health Awareness Week. Deb, I think you would love hearing the talk about art and the brain.
Yes, I'll look it up. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's some more message. Great class, amazing to get so much done in 1 hour. And Phoebe said, I wish I could just be in Deb's brain for just a moment. She's just so brilliant. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this stimulating conversation and our look at all these beautiful visuals, and how you sort of remind me about what we say at the JCC, which is every day there's an opportunity for the extraordinary to happen within the everyday extraordinary to come.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay,
thanks, everyone. I'm going to take off the spotlights and give you a chance to thank our speaker yourselves. And thank you for the opportunity to have a breakout room. That was kind of fun, right? And thanks again, Deb.